Since the Steam Deck launched 3 years ago, I've wanted to use Windows less and less. Every time I use a Windows device in order to play video games, I'm met with loads of frustration. This is because I'm not somebody who wants to have a mouse and keyboard in front of me all of the time. I've been anticipating that Valve would eventually ship a dedicated Steam machine that I could just hook up to my TV. It could do to TV what Valve has done with handhelds, but Valve moves really slow and it turns out it's just too slow for me. So screw it. I'm gonna make a Steam box for myself. First, let's talk about the goals that I have in mind for this build. I wanted to make sure that I could run games at high settings at around 1440p, mostly because I hate soft images. I prefer it to be nice and sharp when I play. 4K would be nice, but it pushes the price up significantly, and I think with 1440p and then upscaling, I can get something that looks pretty damn good. I don't want to use Windows mostly because of the constant need for mouse interactions. I'm going to be on my couch playing this system. I don't want to have a mouse and keyboard nearby. I'll still have them hooked up on the very rare occasion that I need to, abandon gaming mode to head into desktop mode, but the Steam Deck UI is what I want. Another reason that I wanted to avoid Windows is one of my favorite Steam Deck features, and that is sleep-wake functionality. On the Steam Deck, mid-game, you can just turn it off and then come back later and turn it on, and you are right back where you left off. On Windows, I've never been able to get this to work reliably. With that in mind, my options for operating systems are either SteamOS or Bazzite. Yes, I know that there are tons of different distros out there. I wanted something that I was somewhat familiar with and would work for my use case. If there are better Linux distros out there for gaming, feel free to let me know in the comments, but if you do, please give your reasons why. Don't just say a random distro. For me, I would have preferred going with SteamOS, but the more I read up on it, the better Bazzite seemed, because Bazzite seems to have more robust hardware support at this point. I ended up going with Bazzite, though SteamOS probably would have been fine. At this point, I don't see any reason to switch from Bazzite to SteamOS, as almost everything is working very well, though there are some slight problems, but I doubt that they would be solved by switching to another Linux distro. We'll talk about those problems later on in the video. First, let's talk about the hardware that I chose for this build. Now, I think it's important to point out that I am a Mac guy. I used to build my own PCs back in the day, but in my 30s, which was a long time ago, I switched over to consoles for gaming, mostly because I didn't want to be trapped at my desk if I wanted to play a game. Couch gaming is my go-to. The only PC game that I played during that time was World of Warcraft, which worked fine on a Mac, so I was happy with that. I say this because I haven't really built a PC in years, and even the last time that I did, I had to ask someone that I knew that knew a lot more about computer hardware what I should do. So I called a friend of mine that works at Asus. He really knows this stuff, and I wanted his advice on what I should get, what would work together, and what would fit the goals that I had in mind for this build. He liked the idea behind the video and offered to provide some of the parts, but Asus gets zero input over what I put in this video, and they will not see it before you do. They're not sponsoring this video, but this video does have a sponsor, and that's Viture. These are the Viture Luma Pro XR glasses, and they are the best XR glasses that I have used yet. This is thanks to 3 key reasons. Number 1, they have a super sharp display that looks like a 152-inch screen at a distance of 3 meters. If you're new to XR glasses, basically that means the bigger that your room is in, the bigger that the screen will look. It is really cool. Number 2, they have an electrochromic film, which allows you to darken the lenses at the push of a button, which lets you block out the real world and focus on what you're trying to watch. Number 3, I don't have to have glasses for my glasses. If, like me, you're nearsighted, then other XR glasses require you to pay an optometrist in order to cut lenses of your prescription so that you can see clear when you're wearing them. With the Viture Luma Pro XR glasses, all you have to do is turn these dials on the top to make your picture crystal clear. They work with pretty much any USB-C phone, as well as consoles and PC handhelds. If you have a Switch or a Switch 2, then you would need to use their mobile dock, as Nintendo ridiculously doesn't use standard DisplayPort over USB-C. But as a bonus, that mobile dock also has a battery bank. I have a full video about these glasses, and if you want to check that out, there's a link in the description down below, that like button. And a big thank you to Viture for sponsoring this episode. Now, back to what I was saying. Let's start with form factor. When you build your own PC, you have 4 options for form factor. There's eATX, those are the biggest ones. Then there's ATX, which I think is probably what most people would consider the baseline. And then you have smaller form factors like micro ATX and then mini ITX. This is going to be a living room PC like a console, so I don't want it to be big, which leaves out eATX and ATX because they're just too big. At the same time, I decided I didn't want to go with mini ITX because there were 2 reasons. Number one, the smaller stuff tends to be more expensive, but more importantly, a small board and a small case might not leave me enough room to put a bigger graphics card in later on down the road. Micro ATX seemed like the sweet spot for me. Now that I've figured out what form factor I want to go with, I'm going to go with a full AMD build because Linux drivers just tend to be better for AMD than they are for NVIDIA. AMD has 2 socket types right now, AM4 and AM5. Going with AM4 would mean that the overall build would probably be cheaper, but it would be harder for me to upgrade later on down the road. I can see why people would still want to go with AM4, but I decided to go with AM5, which AMD has said that they're supposed to be supporting until I think 2027. It has options for DDR5 memory as well as PCI 5.0 support, so I'm kind of making sure that I can upgrade later on. So looking at the boards that have the AM5 socket type, I ended up going with the Asus B850M Max Gaming motherboard. It has Wi-Fi 6E, a pre-mounted I/O shield. It's got one PCIe 5.0 slot as well as a bonus PCIe 4.0 slot in case I want to put something in there later on. It also has 3 M.2 slots. My goal here is not to use any hard drives in this. I only want fast drives because A, that's way less wires to put inside the box, and B, they're fast. This goes for about $220 on Amazon. As with everything in this video, I will have affiliate links in the description down below. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but if you end up buying with those links, it helps support the channel. Next up is the CPU. As I said, full AMD build, so I decided to go with an AMD Ryzen 9000X with 6 cores and 12 threads. Luckily, this was on sale, so I was able to pick it up for just $165. Putting this in is very easy. All I had to do is open up the retaining lever, lift the socket cover, and then look for this little triangle which shows me how to orient my CPU. Like I said, it's been a very long time since I've built a computer. The CPU doesn't have pins anymore. Anyway, it's just flat on the bottom. It's crazy. I found the same triangle on the CPU, line them up, and drop the CPU in. Then just put the cover back down and then pull down the retention lever and the cover just pops off. It required a little bit more force than I was expecting in order for that to happen, so I was worried that I was about to break something, but sure enough, the socket cover popped right off when I clamped it down, and it was easy. All right. We've got the CPU in. Next up is the memory. I decided to go with 32 gigs of Crucial 4 DDR5 memory with 6400 megatransfers per second. These go for about $90 on Amazon. If you look at the motherboard, you can see that the RAM slots are color-coded. There are 2 gray sockets and 2 black sockets. My instruction manual says to put them in the A2 and B2 slots, which are the gray ones. Let's drop those in. Easy. For storage, I'm salvaging my M.2 2280 drive from my current PC. It has 4 terabytes and I have other M.2 expansion ports on this motherboard, so if I need more storage, that's an easy upgrade later on. I put the standoff screw into the motherboard and I drop in my M.2 drive. Since this is something that I already had, I would say that this adds 0 to my cost, but if you want to buy a 4 terabyte 2280 drive, I've got links down below. This one seems like it's no longer available, but you can get similar ones for around 200 bucks. Okay, next up is cooling. On the advice of a friend, I decided to try my first attempt at liquid cooling. I assumed that this was going to be a huge pain in the ass, but it was actually really easy. I went with the Prime LC 240 ARGB liquid cooler. It retails for about $80. There's a link below. This came with back plates for Intel and for AMD CPUs as they're different shapes, which makes it very easy for a scrub like me to be able to tell them apart. And as a bonus, it has pre-applied thermal paste, so again, I don't have to worry about getting that right. First, I have to remove the Intel mounting bracket from the pump, which is super easy. Next, I have to install the AMD mounting bracket. Also easy. Next up, I'm going to need a screwdriver to remove the plastic heatsink mounts. And now, all I have to do is install the standoffs, which you just screw in by hand. Before I install the pump, I'm going to put the motherboard in the case, because otherwise I'm going to have to fight with the heavy fans while I try to position things. Later on, when I show benchmarks, I'm going to show you the temperatures that I'm getting on my CPU with this cooler. For the case, I wanted something understated. My favorite console design of all time is the Xbox Series X. It's just a plain black rectangle that does not draw attention. I decided to go with the Asus Prime AP201 Micro ATX case, in black of course. My favorite thing about this case, other than how boring it looks, is the fact that all of the side panels are completely toolless. I've never had a computer that didn't need a screwdriver in order to get into, which is important as I have 2 cats and I'm going to need to clean this out on the regular in order to keep things running smoothly. It's a 33-liter case. My goal was to put this on this shelf next to my TV, but it was a little bit too big for that. It didn't look good there. So I decided to just buy a really long HDMI cable and put it underneath my record table stand, my record player table. My record player table? My record player table. It turned out to be a much better option anyway, because now I can reach it from the couch, so I can turn it on without walking across the room. Now, I'm going to admit, as you see me put this together, people that are good at cable management are probably going to be tearing their hair out. I'm sorry, I just cannot be bothered to make the cables all neat and tidy inside a box that's going to be closed 99% of the time. I just don't have the patience for it. All right, we've got the motherboard in and all the wires in the right spot, and that is absolutely the worst part. It's annoying and frustrating. I don't know how people do this on a regular basis, but that's beside the point. Moving on to the graphics card. This is the most expensive part of any gaming PC build. Like I said at the beginning, I wanted something that could run games at 1440p, high settings, using upscaling if needed, and I decided to go with the Asus Prime RX 9070 Overclocked Edition. This card has 3 fans, but it's very quiet, though to be fair, I always have at least a ceiling fan going on in here, and in the summer months, like now, I have an extra fan going just to keep it a little bit cooler in here, and I almost never hear this PC unless it's loading a new level. I might hear the fan spin up real quick and then die down after just a few seconds. This graphics card has 3 display ports as well as HDMI. Unfortunately, this card is also on back order, which drives up the cost. Though on Asus's website, they say it costs about $700. On Amazon, it's over $880 right now. I'll talk about benchmarks for this monster shortly, but first I need to finish the build. The only thing missing now is the power supply. I went with the Asus Tough Gaming 850 watt for only $129. Not much to say about this. It has enough power and then some for everything that I've got in this Steam box, and installation was really easy since the case that I chose has a removable PSU bracket that just pops out, and on top of that, the wires are not already attached to the PSU, which is awesome. I absolutely love that. Every single computer that I have ever built had a PSU with attached wires, and it was always a nightmare because you have extra wires that you're not using and you have to find somewhere for them to go for cable management. Okay, I've got the system built. Now moving on to installing Bazzite, which is incredibly easy. You just go to Bazzite's website and then you download the right version based on answering a few simple questions on their website, and then you just flash it to a USB drive. I have a tutorial for how to install Bazzite linked down below that like button. It's part of my video on the ROG Flow Z13, so if you need help with installing Bazzite or just understanding that process, go check out that video. Once I had the system up and running, I installed all of my heavy-hitting games, and then I ran into my first Linux issue. I couldn't get anything to go over 60 frames per second, even really easy to run games. I could do 1080p 120, but if I raised my resolution above 1080p for anything, I would lose the option to try and get 120 frames per second. I was also really confused, so I reached out to my friend Kyle Gaspanetich, who's the founder of Bazzite, and I asked him, what's up with this? He told me that the reason had to do with the HDMI forum, which is the group that controls the HDMI standard. It's a closed source standard, and they don't want it to be open source but I'm on Linux, so that's not going to work. Luckily, there are workarounds. He suggested that I use DisplayPort, but since I'm hooking it up to a TV, that isn't really an option. I tried to get a DisplayPort to HDMI converter. It's important that I point out that this is an active DisplayPort to HDMI converter, but that made the sound absolutely horrible. I think the word garbage is too kind. So I continued to do some more research. Eventually, I found a post that suggested turning off HDR. So I tried that, and boom, suddenly all of my issues were gone. Apparently, if you want to play your games on Linux using HDMI at higher than 60 frames per second, and you want to have HDR on, you're limited to 1080p. However, if you turn off HDR, then that limitation vanishes, and you get to go all the way up to 4K 120 as long as you don't have HDR on, which is great. Most of the time, I don't have HDR on anyway. It's fine without it. The first thing I tested was the sleep-wake functionality, and for the most part, it works exactly like a Steam Deck does. So when I'm done playing, instead of quitting a game, I just pause it and I press the power button on the Steam box and puts it into sleep mode. However, there have been a couple times where when I turn it back on, the audio doesn't turn back on and I end up having to reboot the system. I'm not sure if there's a solution to that. If you know a solution, please let us know in the comments down below that like button. Next, I wanted to see if I could wake it like I do with my consoles by just pressing a button on my controller. I tried 8BitDo controllers, none of those seemed to wake it. I tried my HoriPad Steam controller, no luck there. I even tried my PlayStation DualSense controller, and nothing would wake the system other than pushing the power button. It isn't a big deal because it's close to my couch, but it is something to keep in mind. If yours isn't close to your couch, then you're going to have to get up and walk across the room anytime you want to wake up your system. As I said before, it's not a huge deal, but definitely something that you want to keep in mind. All right, now that I've got it built and it's working, let's see how hard we can push it. I'm going to bring up Steam's performance overlay just like on the Steam Deck, and let's start with Cyberpunk 2077. We'll check out a few games and you can see what kind of results I'm getting with this monster build. I've got Cyberpunk 2077 set to 1440p. In the graphics tab, I have FSR 3 turned on. However, I have frame generation turned off and texture quality set to high. For ray tracing, I have that turned on along with ray trace reflections, sun, shadows, and local shadows, and ray trace lighting set to medium. I don't have path tracing turned on. Whenever I turn that on, it tanks my frame rate. I've got crowd density set to high, and all of the rest of the settings are as high as they can go, with the exception of screen space reflections quality, which is set to ultra. For Oblivion Remastered, which is a notoriously demanding game, I have my display resolution set to 1440p. I tried 4K. This system couldn't quite handle it. Under quality, I have that set to ultra, and I do have Lumen hardware ray tracing turned on with the Lumen hardware ray tracing mode set to low. I am using FSR 3 for upscaling so that I can get that nice crispy 4K, and I have FSR frame generation turned off because I don't need it. For Avowed, which I've been having an absolute blast with lately, I'm running the game at 1440p with VSync turned off and ray tracing turned off. I am using FSR 3 for upscaling, and I have that set to quality mode. For my graphics quality, I have that set to custom with everything cranked up to epic. As far as I know, there's no frame generation in this game, at least not when you use an AMD card, but obviously, as you can see, it is not needed on a system like this. With Doom: The Dark Ages, I have my resolution set to 4K with VSync turned off. I do have resolution scaling turned on and set to dynamic, and my resolution target for scaling is set to 120 frames per second. Because I'm running this game at 4K, I don't have a need for an upscaler with this game. It's incredibly well optimized. I do have motion blur turned on and set to Ultra Nightmare. Path tracing is turned off. And then under advanced, I have everything else set to Ultra Nightmare settings. But that's going to do it for this episode. Let me know in the comments down below what other parts you think I should have gotten instead of this, or what upgrades you think I might want to pick up down the line. As I said before, I haven't built a computer in a really long time, but it was actually a pretty fun process. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If it's your first time here, please subscribe. From the NerdNest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye, everybody.